Welcome. How's everybody doing? Welcome to this week's Griscom stream. It's good to see some folks already in the chat. For folks who are new to this, definitely just get into the YouTube chat and ask questions. Definitely like these to be more of a conversation. And we always appreciate super chats when we can get them. It really helps keep this show moving. But these are a little bit less formal videos for Left Reckoning, where we sort of go through the early stories of the week and start trying to build toward a deeper understanding. There's obviously a lot of of things to cover. Just wanted to start out by saying solidarity with all the protesters fighting against state violence. There's no takes there. It's just solidarity and hope and let's continue working to build a better future. This week we got our show Thursday at 8. We should be able to announce some guests soon, but I know that we're going to be either as a part of the show on Thursday or releasing separately a conversation we're having with the directors of the Reclaim Idaho film, which you should definitely check out if you haven't seen it already. It's a really exciting film talking about how to organize and fight for working people and for people who need extra help from society, and how to do that in a state that a lot of people write off because it's a red state. We're talking about Idaho, and they were able to get Medicaid expansion passed through ballot initiative, and that took a lot of real deal organizing. It wasn't something that you had big corporations coming up lining, writing big checks for folks to be able to do that. This came out of people who had a genuine desire to better their community and understood that they could bring more and more people into the movement to actually achieve victory. So really looking forward to that. So we will definitely be doing that, and then also we're going to be talking about Ecuador on Thursday and Bessemer, and some lessons as well on Thursday. We'll have some initial conversations today, but definitely let's see that. Sorry, it's been a good day. I got my vaccine this morning, but I'm feeling a little tired, but no bad side effects, and it was a great experience. So definitely do that if you can. And if you're in the Austin area, I have to say the UT system was really amazing. I mean, I was in and out there in like half an hour. It was a really nice experience. But let's start. We already have some questions here from Patrick Stevens. Really appreciate Patrick. Patrick wants to ask regarding the USPS box at Amazon. I'd imagine that DeJoy had the final say in making that happen. How much blame does Biden deserve for keeping him on? His firing should have been day one agenda, in my opinion. Well, regarding DeJoy, from what I understand, that's not an office that responds directly to the president. And what I mean by that is, I don't think that Biden actually is able, through traditional means to just pull him out. I think that he's selected by a board, and that board has had a lot of right-wing appointees for a while. So I think it might be a bit of a period of time before they're going to be able to get rid of him. But I could be mistaken about that. But that's my general understanding of the politics around the Postal Service. But there's no doubt there that, this organization that's supposed to be, public good ended up aligning with Amazon. I think that says a lot more about the power of a corporation like Amazon than it does necessarily about, the post office. That, not saying that there was probably, weren't moments where the post office could refuse to acquiesce to Amazon's obviously illegal requests. But the way that these systems are set up, the post office, for example, is an organization that has some stake now in Amazon because of how reliant Amazon is on those facilities. And that's the kind of perverse relationship that you have from corporations like Amazon, especially as we're moving into more and more like online shopping and online distribution. Those roles start to get a little murky, and in an environment where we're actually having to have arguments with people about why something called the Postal Service isn't like one of the most profitable companies in the United States. It's a difficult situation to be in politically. But Patrick's saying here, thanks again, that he's read that Biden could have fired the governors and appointed better ones. Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% sure on that one, so it's hard for me to to speculate too much. But if that's the case, it wouldn't surprise me either, because we get a lot more rhetoric from Biden than we do action, which has sort of been one of the big frustrations that the left has, one predicted, and have been sort of trying to raise more and more attention about. Since he's been in office. But again, I don't know for sure how that policy works, so I don't want to speculate too much on it off the top. But no, I mean, absolutely. And what we've seen from Biden over the past week has been pretty despicable. From the from increased military spending, calls for that, a kind of half-assed troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. People who are really in the know on that say that like there's not as much teeth to this kind of hope that Biden's been putting forward, that the United States will leave Afghanistan after 20 years. Obviously the calls for continuing to build the border wall. I mean, we knew what we were getting with Biden from the get-go, and I think it's time that the left, because I think most people on the left are like ready to walk away from him and start doing that real kind of work of distancing the left socialist movement from the Democratic Party in the minds of like your everyday voter, member of of the public. There's still some people who, for whatever reason, really feel like they want to be on the inside and be able to like call victories from within, and it's definitely not. Definitely not on. And Kenzo says here, Biden's goal of opening every school in his first 100 days have contributed to the spike in cases. Exactly. It's that stuff is just as a labor issue is really frightening. I was talking to one of my neighbors here, who's a substitute teacher, but used to be a full-time teacher, but just couldn't do it because they were worried about having to go into work. And contracting coronavirus, knowing that they had health issues that could really put them at risk. And obviously, Texas was already on full-on death drive before that. But I'm just saying that as like a case that so many teachers are facing now, as they're getting all this pressure from Biden, and also from kind of rabid folks within their own community to sort of put their lives at risk. It's really nasty, especially in states that have not had very effective vaccine rollouts for a lot of folks. It's I think that's definitely on, and solidarity with everybody across the country, and certainly in Chicago, as they continue to face this battle, which is where the labor movement is going to be seeing more and more growth and militancy. It's what we've seen has been teachers unions, for example, have been at the forefront of fighting fighting not just for their own rights in their own communities, but also at trying to like revitalize the U.S. labor movement, which which this country desperately needs. And we'll talk a little bit about Alabama in maybe a couple of minutes, but it's one of those things where it's like we're going to have many of these moments and these battles that are coming, and hopefully we'll get more and more victories as we continue to fight. But the reality is that we really have to revitalize a spark in the U.S. Labor movement, not just in the will, because this is the thing that was so annoying about reading some of people's responses to Alabama. Was you have all these people who, first of all, had no relationship or real understanding of what was happening in Bessemer, Alabama, going on about like, oh well, the union organizers should have known that. And I'm not talking about like McElvee's piece in the his piece in the Nation or any of those things. I'm talking about like just like random folks on Twitter who consider themselves to be leftists, like, oh well, the union should have known that Amazon was going to use dirty tactics and they should have prepared for it. It's like, what the hell are you talking about? I mean, obviously, they should be trying to prepare for any kind of situation. Do you think you're like dumbass sitting here is like the first person to think, oh, well, if I'm doing a campaign, I should prepare for the moves of my opponent? Obviously, they were trying to do that. We can maybe say you've made mistakes here, right? But it wasn't a question of like, oh, well, they didn't consider that they needed to be preparing to have a counter move to Amazon's, attacks against them. Of course, people were trying to do that. Again, you can criticize them on actual tactics and things like that, but there's this kind of absurd criticism that you see from people, especially online, where it's like, oh, well, these people just didn't want it enough, and they didn't think about it hard enough, or like they didn't think about it in like this extremely superficial way that I'm going to opine on Twitter, which I just think is extremely unhelpful. Again, that's very, very different from well-researched and thought-out criticisms of strategy, and I think those conversations need to happen. And I think anybody trying to say that we shouldn't have any kind of postmortems on what happened in Bessemer, Alabama, and having questions about whether or not doing such a big union campaign and the media making as big a deal of it as they did, I think that those are conversations and they're very reasonable to have, but. I think the kind of like really, really sloppy armchair quarterback from people who were saying that kind of superficial criticism, and then people who were saying things like, how did they fumble this one? Well, it's because it's extremely difficult. We live in a country whose laws have been designed to be as anti-union as possible, which is why, and this is not an escape because we have to deal with it regardless of if we get this through Congress or not. And I seriously have my doubts that we're going to see it with the Biden administration. But this is why we need something like the PRO Act, because the law makes the union campaign so stacked against the unions. But even without that, we have to be prepared to be much more strategic and smart about the ways that we're building union campaigns, because if we can't get the legal protections that we need, we're going to have a kind of like superhuman organizing strength to be able to overcome these tactics that they can use, because those tactics make it really, really easy for corporations like Amazon, especially, to squash union. Someone says, laugh my ass off. How did they lose to one of the most powerful companies in the entire world? Right? It's like, exactly. That's the point. Again, I'll get into some maybe the criticisms a little bit later to this. But it was funny to see, like, you had both sides of like people who were like, okay, we can't make any kind of criticisms or have any conversation about what happened in Alabama. This like really important labor movement and moment in the fight that a lot of people were talking about, are really excited about. Oh, we can't have any criticisms of that, which was, I think, is an incorrect take. Then all the way to the other side, people were like, I can't believe that a bunch of, that a new union failed at one of the most powerful corporations in the world, in a state that is, right to work in a country that has some of the most anti-union laws that there are. It's pretty incredible. Kenzo says, should have you on, Kenzo. Let's talk about this soon sometime. But Kenzo says, the peace in the nation is good, but it's about the standard operating procedure of the labor bureaucracy. I see the 30% vote as a potential to build a greater movement. I think that that's also, what a lot of folks, are feeling too, that it's not like, oh, this is like, an impossible moment that nothing can happen in the future. And then, like, let's just get this straight, because, we haven't really talked about it since Thursday. We had our feelings on Thursday, but we didn't have the final, results. Now, Amazon acted illegally. There's going to be legal challenges, and, they might even try to have a second vote on this. I don't know if that will necessarily be successful, but this is not over. This is not over at all, because Amazon certainly acted illegally, and I'm sure the union is going to continue to pressure. I've also been reading that Teamsters are considering, strategic interventions as well. Like, there's a lot of different strategies that are going on there to really, continue to prod at this problem, which is Amazon, and to come at it from a bunch of different angles and a bunch of different strategies. To what Kenzo was saying about, labor bureaucracy, I will say there's, some things that I can talk about, some things that I don't think I should, just because I'm not a labor organizer. I'm not in a labor union, so I don't want to overstretch my knowledge on these things. I do think that, I think that we can't claim easy victories, and we just can't be complacent in defeat, which is not to say not to celebrate the bravery and the power of all the folks who are doing the organizing work there. It's just to say, okay, this is really fucking important. This is like, life or death struggles that we're having right now. And we need to take it seriously and do that in the spirit of solidarity and being comrades to one another, not tearing anybody down, but understanding what we can do in the future so that we can win. That's my top line on that. Yoda says, need power for unions, need unions for power, a catch-22. Well, I think that's 100%. Yeah, it's definitely a catch-22, but it's going to come through unions and political organizations that are working class based and not just focused. And that's one of the things that we're really dealing with in the US left right now, is that we have more and more organizations that are working class focused, right? They care about working class people, working class politics. And those organizations have a lot of people who are working class within them, but they're not as deeply rooted. Which is why, when you see people tweeting things and shouting slogans like general strike, it's like, well, yeah, like, of course, but how and who, and you have to understand, is like, if we don't have strong enough unionization, that we're still struggling to get people to decide to join unions in conditions that are obviously egregious, because they're frightened, and they know that they don't trust that engaging in this kind of politics or organization is actually going to benefit them. Then it's a pretty big task to go from laws there to saying, okay, well, the answer is a general strike, right? To be able to do any of this kind of stuff, we have to build our power, and you build your power through organizing. I don't think it's like as much of it's a catch-22, and it's like, yeah, it's difficult, but it's the path is actually a little bit clearer. That it's like, we have to build this kind of consciousness through organizations. That's just the only way it's going to happen. We're not going to create like the campaign slogan that is just going to wake everybody up. We're going to have to find ways to get people to think of themselves as members of a class, and to not trust the bosses when they come in and they hire union consultants to shout a bunch of nonsense at you. Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not losing any of these conversations. David says their issue is, was it tactically wise to publicize a fight they thought they would lose? Well, I think that question has less to do with the union and more to do with like left media. I think it was 100% worth covering and talking about, because it was a really inspiring moment, and things were looking really good. I think that some folks got a little bit, especially once it got to become such a large story. I think some of the ways that it was being covered were just like fanciful. I mean, we got a lot of, like, for example, like demographics is destiny stuff, in the way that the Bessemer union was being covered, especially in like big publications. And once I saw that, I was like, okay, this is going to be a moment where, we're not really seeing a lot of conversations with workers. We're seeing a lot of people from out of state, making big, bold claims, because, in the liberal mind, they think that all of these, situations are going to be solved, just simply by demographics. And we're seeing that fail across the South and also across the country, right? And it's also extremely, it's incorrect to do that. And it's also extremely, it's unhelpful, because you're not seeing people as complex individuals. You're seeing people as statistics and expecting them to act in a certain way, and not understanding that all of this, all of these different things that we consider ourselves to be are our identities that are in flux. And the goal of politics is to organize these different, parts of ourselves into something that is politically useful. And that's like the whole hope of socialist politics, is that we have this ability as workers to consider ourselves as workers, and that will allow us to join organizations and act as a class. And once I started seeing some of the ways it was getting reported, it's like, okay, this is starting to get like immaterial in a lot of ways. And I don't know. I don't think that that's why they lost. But I think that is something that was not helpful, because I think it created an expectation that things were going to be a lot closer than I think most people who were in the union movement felt. They felt going in that it was an uphill battle. And I think there was an early time when everybody was saying it was an uphill battle, but towards the end, people stopped saying that and just sort of acting like it was a sure thing. And it's difficult, especially if you're doing media that's like left wing or socialist, to figure out about how to handle that, because obviously you want to support everybody and not demoralize people before a big vote. But I think that that's definitely something that we need to be, considering. Let me see. Yeah, so Migby says, can you talk about Ecuador? I'm going to. Let me just, since we started talking about Amazon, make sure that I think on Thursday, we're going to do a longer conversation about this, Matt and I, and spend a little bit more time on it. Because there's a lot to say about it. I mean, there's a lot tactically to say about that. And I think I'd prefer to have conversations with more people who are involved directly in the labor movement about direct strategy. I can really just say that, let me think if there's one thing I want to do to put a bow on it, though. If anyone has any questions, I'm sure that I'll come back on this. It's a tough loss. We want to see these kinds of things happen. As socialists, we believe in the ability and the possibility of working people to be able to organize themselves into powerful blocs. And I think that it's really important to remember that this movement happened because people in those facilities decided they want to stand up for themselves, and they took the extremely risky and brave move to take on one of the most powerful corporations in the world. And they did a hell of a lot. And a lot of people are now much more engaged in thinking about themselves as members of the working class, as people who are pro-union, than there were before this moment. And I don't think we should claim easy victories, because that's how we get complacent. But I also don't think that we should make the mistake of falling into despair and being demoralized every time we don't win. Because I'm going to tell you one thing. Historically, where we are as a class is weak. We are in a difficult position right now, politically and economically, and also with this damn pandemic still. We are in a very difficult position historically. But there are mobilizations and movements that are going in a positive direction. And as Marxists, you should be able to recognize that. So don't sit here and say everything's perfect, right? And let's not criticize, let's not agitate, let's not mobilize, let's not organize. But also don't fall into a kind of despair moment. I've recently, well, things are so bad that nothing is possible. Because sooner or later, people make these moves. And this is just what is the hard actual life lessons that we're going through as a movement of trying to take on Amazon, and not just Amazon, but an entrenched class of bourgeoisie that have pretty much had their say. The reason that when it comes to union organizing, the reason that the system is so slated towards the people, towards the bosses, is because the bourgeoisie, the 1%, the rich, the bosses, whatever you want to call them, have had their say politically for an extremely long time. That they have been able to not just rule today, but undermine, retroactively, win fights that we thought were settled, right? Which were basic kind of labor, victories that we won in the 20th century, right? They've been able to knock those out and put us into this historically weak position, and we're up against this class. And it's really hard, and it's not going to be easy, and there's going to be no silver bullet. So what we have to understand is that, one, you should be very optimistic when you see that there is mobilization instead of despair. And two, you should take that into your own work and your own life and say, things are possible. They aren't going to be easy. So I need to be trying to understand the world around me as much as possible. I need to be trying to make connections with people as much as possible. I need to be thinking about politics as something that's very real and something that I can engage in, and something that you can engage in, not as a way to express your personal values or ideas, but actually to eventually wield power to better your life and those around you, right? You got to be able to hold the fact that we're in a difficult position right now and things can change. And when you see things like people in Bessemer, Alabama saying, we're going to stand up and fight, even if they lose, you should understand that that is an exciting time, because I'll tell you, I'm not, I'm 28. Like, I'm not, I'm a younger person. I've been a socialist for a little bit of time, but I remember when it was just a, thing that I was, and a couple other people were, and never thought of myself as a part of a movement. And now I certainly do, because the movement has been building stronger and stronger and stronger, and is more and more rooted in people's lives. We have a hell of a lot of ways to go, but we're moving. And again, that doesn't mean we get complacent, but it also doesn't mean that you should fall into despair. And I think, we'll have more conversations about, Amazon and Bessemer, hoping to take in a few different directions over the next few weeks. But I think that that's like the top line thing that folks need to remember. And also for people who just tuned in, that Amazon cheated and they lied, and what they did was illegal. And they also wouldn't have been as successful if the PRO Act were law. So that's something that you can support today. All right, let me make sure I didn't miss too many questions in there while I was going. And also, I think so. Just if people are interested in reading about this, I think Jane McAlevy's piece in The Nation was really good. There was also a good piece there's a couple good pieces in Jackman, actually, but one that engages more with this was Rich Yesselson. I hope I'm saying that correctly. The Defeats at Amazon, the Union Fights to Come, which I also thought was a pretty strong piece too, that engages with Jane's piece. And there's also a really interesting piece that I was reading earlier today too about global supply chains, and I'd like to be able to do more on that in the future, because that's also very interesting, kind of like large scale strategizing that we need to be able to do. All right, let me. Y'all want to talk? If anyone has any questions, jump in right now. If not, I'll do some Ecuador stuff. And again, these are just sort of previews, because we're going to do in depth stuff. Obviously a lot of bad news. There's some pretty interesting results in Peru over the weekend, so it wasn't a very happy one for the global left. But I mean, let's start with a little bit with the positive. Let's start a little bit with the positive, and that's what happened in Peru. And this was something that was a surprise to a lot of folks, including myself. Early on, people were considering Veronica Mendoza to be the candidate of the left, and hoping that was going to be a successful campaign, and it wasn't. But there was a pretty exciting shift that we saw in Peru. With Castillo, who's basically is like a rural communist. It's probably a decent way to describe him, at least a populist, leftist. Was able to win 19% of the vote. Is going to go on into the second round elections against Keiko Fujimori, who is who's the daughter of a former dictator of the country, who's now imprisoned for human rights abuses. So it's going to be a very interesting clash between a more right-wing, extremely right-wing authoritarian kind of pro-capitalist, pro-market, party and movement in the country, and a rural, anti-neoliberal, anti-capitalist. And what keeps on being reported in the United States, is socially conservative. And maybe I'll get to that in a second, why I think that, I think it's worthwhile to mention, and obviously it's important because these things affect folks. But I think, especially with what we've been seeing in South America lately, you can see the way that, Western media, especially Western, progressive media, is trying to kind of set you up for discrediting and walking away and turning your back on a lot of anti-capitalist movements in that part of the country. Yeah, and I think the funny thing that we're going to see right now is all of the folks in all of these liberals and cosmopolitans and people who love democracy are going to be I'm pretty sure throwing in their support to Fujimori. And certainly they'll come up with some clever reason as to why, but it's because this is somebody who wants to open up the country to capitalist exploitation as much as possible. So, Pedro Castillo, and I gotta say, aesthetically, this is somebody who I am very primed to support. I've put up on Twitter, and I'm sure we'll do it on the show on Thursday. This is somebody who rode in on a horse to vote, wears an incredible cowboy hat. When they came to interview him after his victory, he was, milking cows on the farm. Very interested. Very interesting guy. But talking a little bit more, specific about him. I mean, this is somebody who's running on the hope to change the Constitution, which is something that is desperately needed in that country. This is somebody who is running on an anti-capitalist platform. This is somebody who is running on nationalizing what he's calling key economic sectors. The things that matter to global capital: oil, hydrocarbons, electric and gas, things like that. So it's definitely it's an exciting moment. It's an interesting political moment, especially because the polls and the pollsters and the analysts really got this wrong. Not just that Pedro Castillo is going to win out, but people didn't even consider that to be in at least the media that I was reading beforehand a possibility. I'm sure people saw things on Twitter, like CNN didn't even have like a photograph for him for their election recap, because it was he sort of was flying under the radar. And I think it's one thing to note, and in South America, that there is such a big gulf of space in media and in coverage and honestly in care between the urban centers and rural parts of a lot of South American countries. It's certainly the case in Ecuador. It's definitely the case in Peru. I mean, it was very much shown that people did not have their finger on the pulse of this one. And we've also obviously seen this in Bolivia. I'll just say, again, we're going to talk a little bit more about this. We'll get to Ecuador in just a second. I was just starting with Peru to start with some positive positive news here. So basically right now there's this divide between urban and rural. I think some of the things that we've seen early analysis is that, Veronica Mendoza, who was somebody too, who I talked about even last week as the candidate from the left. This is somebody who represented a kind of more traditional left movement in the sense of people when they were seeing her running were okay, well, this is the left candidate, but very much ran on whatever, I don't know what the term right now is to describe it in South America, but a kind of left that's anti-Cuba. She called Maduro dictator, while Castillo was saying the opposite, and is very much actually trying to include himself in that lineage of left-wing, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist movements in the region. I think that's extremely notable. While Mendoza was very much considered to be on the left because they were focused a lot on the social left positions, it seems from my understanding that it was not one hidden home with a lot of working people there, but it was also at the expense of a very strong anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist message. And it can't be understated the fact that her party had serious corruption allegations, as well as many of the other parties and candidates running in the field. While Pedro Castillo is a teacher who gets into politics because he was leading very successful teacher strikes, right? Just very different kind of class of politician there, and the fact that this is a country that's been very much betrayed by the political class. It's a country that's really suffering under COVID. So I think that opened up, a space for, to use a little term that, our philosophy people out there might get excited about, a rupture. So we'll see. I mean, we're definitely going to have to, keep looking into that. I think the election's on July 6th, so I'd be very interested in trying to talk to some. I've been looking for some good people in Peru to speak to and bring them on Left Reckoning soon too. But that's the sort of first runoff. Oh yeah, and Evo has. I have the quote actually in front of me. Evo Morales has already endorsed Pedro Castillo, but I will just say this right now, because we're going to get into this in a second with Ecuador. If you see this runoff between, like, if you're somebody who is like sympathetic to lesser two evils kind of shit in the United States, and now seeing everything that Biden has done in office, and you're going to take any time to figure out who you would support in Peru, you need to do some serious reevaluation of yourself. Pedro Castillo versus like a literal right-wing pro-authoritarian candidate, pro-capitalist candidate. There is no choice here if you have any sense of hope for humanity, anti-authoritarian impulses, anti-capitalist impulses. It's a no-brainer. But Evo Morales has already endorsed Pedro Castillo. He said, he was saying that he was sad to lose in Ecuador, but that we've won in Peru in the first round, and basically saying that Pedro Castillo won on the proposal, on the Bolivian proposal, on the idea of the new left in South America. They won on those ideas. So that's a very strong endorsement from somebody who I'm very, very, very much, want to listen to. But yeah, we'll definitely keep on that. And yeah, let's see. I think, and thank you so much, Daniel, for the support there. Okay, let me make sure. Yeah, don't even joke about there being another Fujimori. Let me see. Somebody's asking about the social conservatives of Castillo. I don't want to jump too much into that. Not out of, because I just don't think it's worthwhile to like run off of pure speculation on things. But I will say that the way that this is presented to you as a Western reader, I think is worth like noting. From what I understand, Castillo is somebody who says, for example, like questions on abortion, he wants those to be brought into that. That's for the people to decide, stuff like that. I don't think that this is somebody who you would categorize as a social progressive. But this is somebody who wants to restore popular democracy to a country where they don't have that. And this is somebody who wants to rewrite the Constitution, wants to, include more and more access of everyday people into the democratic process, stuff like that. And, if you're somebody who believes in the righteousness of these ideas, that should be an encouraging first step for you to win out, right? Because you need more democracy to be able to win a lot of these social fights that we have that are very important. And I'm not dismissing those at all, but I will say that our opponents do understand that they can get a lot of play in Western media with progressives by pitting, American values on these things versus values that are, more prevalent in the rest of the world. And I just think that people should be a little bit careful, just because this historic moment happens in Peru, or at least unexpected. And like the top takeaway that most people who are casually following politics have gotten is that this person is socially conservative. Not that this is somebody who's running against, a hyper authoritarian, not that this is somebody who wants to rewrite the Constitution to protect more people's democratic rights and things like that. That's all that I'll say on that for now. But I would like to have more conversations. I would like to have more conversations with folks in Peru about that. But I think that, and I think a big part of this too also has to go back to this kind of rural urban divide that we're seeing. So it's like in Lima, his party did not do very well compared to the rest of the country. So there very much is like a stark divide between city urban values and more rural ones. And that's going to be a struggle going forward. But I think that understanding where these things are sort of lining up is going to be important as well. Yeah, let's see, like yeah, Antonio over here is going off the authoritarian daughter of a president who abolished the Senate. Insane stuff. Liam says, are there consultants that can give advice to people wanting to start a union? Might be in a position to start one soon for exploited freelancers in my field. Well, I don't know your industry. Maybe send me a private message, and I can see if I can put you in any direction there. But it's definitely lots moving. A lot of opportunities right now for union organizing. But let's see, while we're still on this thread, let's talk a little bit about Ecuador. And again, we're going to do more in-depth conversations about this, maybe on Thursday, might even have to wait a week. We're still early. Obviously, this is a absolutely devastating loss, not just for Ecuador, but for the globe as well, and the region. It's really sad to remember that, going into this election year, we're seeing things like Evo Morales saying, if we win in Ecuador and Peru, we're going to start moving forward with more integration across Latin America, which is a project that I very much support and I think is very much needed to counterbalance American imperialism. So seeing that loss in Ecuador is exceptionally devastating, especially if you know the recent history of the pink tide, that Ecuador was so important, not just because of what Correa was doing in the country, but also for that kind of international bloc of left-wingers that was very much rooted in Ecuador. So that loss is very much devastating. I think there's a few top line things that we can note. I think the first thing that we should note is that it's, again, just paint how much of a loss it is. We're already seeing Lasso make a pledge to end all deficit spending in the country, to basically cut their budget. This is a country that has extreme inequalities, that has been hit really hard through coronavirus and through hyper, extractive imperialism. So seeing that there's going to be another shift to more austerity is really, really devastating. And as you lose an election, and that's sad that your ideas aren't going to be put in place, but to know that not only are these positive things not going to happen, that things are going to get worse. It's definitely a very difficult loss. And I think it also needs to be noted too, not to make excuses, that there was serious lawfare against Andrés Arauz and the party, constant legal challenges to their access to the ballot, constant harassment from the state. I mean, this was not a neutral playing field at all. The state apparatus is very much pitted against them. And there was also high level collusion between the right wing in Ecuador and Colombia, including just pumping, and especially with the media that is so dominated by the rich and so dominated by the elite, that was pumping people with these stories. That Andrés Arauz is aligned with terrorist organizations across the region. We played that funny video on Left Reckoning that was found to be a fabrication because of some bird in the background that is only indigenous to Ecuador, not to Colombia. Because they were saying that Colombian guerrilla groups were supporting and coordinating with Andrés Arauz. And it turns out it was just a fake video. But these things were amplified by extremely hostile media, right? So in that environment, it was very difficult to win, unfair tactics. But much like the reality in Amazon, with in Alabama with Amazon. It's like, yeah, and we can understand that, and we have to win. So I think that we can understand that, so that's not like an attack on anybody, but it's like, okay, well, of course, like the state and the rich and the global elite are going to be stacked against us, and we have to be able to beat through that. A loss is still a loss. Could there have been more of a political shift in the campaign to move away, to move to start talking a little bit more about radical change, because this did end up becoming like a kind of about the kind of kitchen table issues conversation, from the party. So could they have benefited more from a little bit more of a radical posture? I don't know. Instead of trying to make it about just good governance. And I think the bigger lesson that I've been hearing and talking to people who are very familiar with the area, is that the relations with the base were very much fractured going into this election. And let's also not forget that this was always a question and a difficulty of the Korea movement, because it was such a broad-based movement that included everybody from socialists to business interests. It was very much this kind of big tent party, under Korea, that was that has there's tensions that come with that, right? I mean, it gives you the potential of having electoral victories, but it also makes it very difficult to implement the long-term goals. I think Guillaume Long, you can listen to his interview with Grace Blakely. I'm sure he's talked about it elsewhere, but he really talks about that contradiction with the Korea movement and how they were trying to do something a little bit different. And I think that there were good faith efforts to do that, but maybe it just wasn't strong enough. I mean, it wasn't a blowout, but it was definitely a disappointing loss. We'll definitely have to see what the lessons are. The lessons are going forward. And I also think that there was, just to do a little bit more like electoral analysis. I mean, I think the damage that Yaku Perez did to the left movement there is something that has to be mentioned. I mean, he flirted with campaigning against Soros, flirted with calling for the police and the military to come in, against electoral fraud. I mean, there was a pretty serious effort from somebody who was allegedly, a leftist, as he was being talked about in the U.S. press, an eco-socialist, to really muddy the waters for Andreas Soros. There was not a union of this. You would think that somebody who considers himself to be a leftist would prefer Andreas Soros to somebody like Lasso, who is going to immediately open up the country to the worst forms of hyper extraction and exploitation. You would think that somebody like that, you would be opposing them with every fiber of your being. But we did not see that kind of strength, and ended up fracturing the left in the country. And I think that this is something that is going to be more and more of a problem, as there is this kind of these more left candidates like Yaku Perez. I don't want to talk about his party or that movement, because as Austin was saying when he was on Left Reckoning, like those indigenous movements are legit, and those movements were fractured again about Yaku Perez and his very, very anti Korea, anti-left, like anti-Latin American left. I mean, this is Yaku Perez, for people who don't remember, was somebody who was just like the poster child of like the American, more like boutique, I don't know, like hipster left, in the sense that like, oh, he rode a bicycle and he's against like extraction, but he also thinks that Maduro is a dictator and celebrated Lula's imprisonment and also celebrated the coup in Bolivia, right? He was a perfect kind of hybrid candidate there, and I think that's a kind of development that we'll be seeing more and more, and it's something we need to be quick at calling out. But it's an extremely tough loss, and I'm looking forward to having more conversations on Left Reckoning, sort of get to the bottom of it, because I was very, very inspired by Andreas Soros. I thought he would have been a really great leader and had a very good strategy for change and development. So we'll see. Kowalski says, good news. Corn and soy prices are at 7-year highs. Rural folks are losing interest in politics as economic outlook is getting better. It might lead to a good midterm if Dems message it well in the grain belt. Well, happy to hear that folks are doing better there. And always happy to hear from you, Kowalski. Ecuador is the only place that you could say leftists don't want there to be another Lenin. Yeah, that's pretty good. For folks who aren't familiar, the current president is Lenin Moreno, whose name is not an accident. He was named after Lenin, and he turned his back on the revolution and the movement pretty quickly. Yeah, Jacob says Yaku Perez led a massive ballot spoiling campaign. I haven't seen these numbers, but the commenter saying led to over 1 million spoiled ballots. Lasso won by about 400,000. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of dissatisfaction campaign that we saw from Perez was extremely damaging. And Javier says Perez played his own game, but Correa Rose should have formed a big front with indigenous VP, maybe from the start, maybe with support from Evo Morales. Yeah, I mean, I think that this kind of break with the social basis there was very damaging. To not be able to capture, and obviously it was going to be hard to do that after the Yaku Perez, confrontation in the first round. But no, I think that there could have been, you have to deal with the conditions, and I thought they were doing a good job at it. I think that they might have underestimated just how much Perez was willing to burn it down. But yeah, I mean, these are the lessons. We can lose. It's devastating to lose, but you have to learn the lessons. Which leftist do you think would be the most savage debate opponent for Jordan Peterson? I mean, I've always thought Wolf would do a good job against him because I think he wouldn't get too caught up. Wolf is really great. I think there's a reason that Peterson was afraid of him, because Wolf is really great because he can have those high-minded discussions on things. But he also explains things really well. And I think any conversation that someone on the left has with Peterson really needs to be made with the strategic focus to be reaching Peterson's, fans. So you need to be very clear and very articulate and very persuasive. And I think Wolf would be a very dangerous, a very, very dangerous opponent for Peterson, which is why he chickened out the first time they were going to go into each other. Let's see. Imagine Giannis Varoufakis versus Jordan Peterson. I mean, yeah, but what would the debate be on? I think the funniest thing about Jordan Peterson is that he, what is Jordan Peterson famous for? He's famous for being a real baby about, kind of just decency laws in Canada. And it's mainly, he's famous for two things. He's famous for being a super anti-trans bigot and for writing a pretty, shitty run-of-the-mill self-help book. The fact that we have to talk to him about Marxism is funny to me, that he's treated as any kind of expert in Marxism, because he doesn't engage with Marxism. He uses Marxism as a metaphor, and I mean it in a metaphor in the sense it's he's made up a boogeyman, and he uses that to pin all the things that he thinks are bad on. But he never engages with Marxism as a social phenomenon, except to say that the Gulag is bad. So I think that somebody like Wolf would be a great example of somebody, because you know what I wouldn't want? I wouldn't want somebody who would just go up and say, I wouldn't want somebody who would just go up and say whatever lies you want about the history of communism and socialism, and we're just going to let you do that and then move on. Because I think that's really damaging to give right-wingers like Peterson that opportunity, because they will create a history that is so dark and so evil and so, so much as a funhouse mirror of what actually happened, that it can be really damaging for the left. But you also don't want somebody who's so ingrained and needs somebody to praise Stalin, the Soviet Union, to consider themselves to be a leftist. You don't want that person going up against Peterson, because that's going to alienate a lot of people, and some of them probably rightfully so. Wolf is great because Wolf deals with the Soviet Union as it was as a history. His line Soviet Union I always thought was great. It's we'll think about this one day if we're living under socialism as as like a beautiful, like, as a first attempt, as an attempt to do something that's really hard, and it wasn't perfect, but we'll see it as a go at it, as an attempt. If we're ever living in socialism one day, and I just think that's a good way to deal with it instead of just like running away with it, running right into it or running away from it. Yeah, because Wolf is not somebody who like has any kind of like illusions or romanticism about this stuff. But he is somebody who's very clear-eyed and has a great job at speaking about this. Um, Let me see. hmm Okay, there's a fight going on in the thing, so I'm trying to cut through that. Uh, Dig the stash, rotating stash the beard to clean, makes my skin feel better. Yeah, I don't know. I think I'm cutting my hair tomorrow too. We'll see. Not super short or anything like that, but I'm getting a little bit done with the. People keep talking about Vosh. I don't know what people are talking about Vosh. I don't watch. I don't watch. I don't watch them. I don't watch any of that stuff really. I don't know. Um, it's not really the. It's not really the most interesting things to me. Yeah, I'm gonna get bangs. um, no, I don't think Vosh, from what I've seen about him debating Peterson, would be good for anything other than maybe ticket sales. Liam says, "What did the Soviet Union majorly get wrong?" That might be a tough one to do. But I mean, the top line on it is that you had a country that was extremely, and it's one of these things when we talk about state theory. If you're a patron of the show, I've been posting a lot about state theory and readings regarding it, because you have to understand the way that development works. You can't just go from, um, you know, trying to move from an extremely, agrarian and feudal society into a capitalist one under the control of a communist party that was supposed to spur in industry and capitalist development, was an extremely difficult position. A difficult position which Lenin understood and wrote about. And basically the hope there was that if they could just keep this revolution alive, if they could just keep the working people in power for the revolution to show up in Germany, for the revolution to happen around the rest of the world, then they would be, that they would be okay, right? But instead, what ends up happening is Lenin, who was again one of the most important, theorists, somebody who was really engaged, not just because he was really smart and well read, but because he was able to both understand Marxism but also see the world around him with clear eyes, which is why. Lenin was somebody who wrote, a classic text like left-wing communism and infantile disorder. And by that, he's talking about like ultra-leftists who were refusing to see the reality of what was needed to be done in the Soviet Union, which was to industrialize the society massively, which meant that you needed to engage in some kind of like small-scale capitalism while also suppressing the rising capitalist class. And anyways, these are the tensions that you have in the early Soviet Union. And then when it doesn't happen, when the workers don't rise up in Germany, you have this state that is just sitting on top of a development project, that is just going to be extremely difficult to maintain. And that's a big part of the political repression that was going on. Is because to maintain this development, you created a system like that also inherited an extremely cruel system before from the czar state, right? Like the state itself was already you know not one to be too admired, that they inherited from the czar. So anyways, these are the historical difficulties that you get into the Soviet Union, and I think it's worthwhile to engage with them seriously as leftists. um yeah, well, rest in peace. Dakota says, I've been checking out Palancis. It was a great read. Read, like, if you read Miliband, Palancis, and like Panich, like in conversation with each other, that's like going to be the master course. I'd like to do more with that. And Ed Rooksby, rest in peace, incredible theorist. He's somebody whose work I was really excited to read more of. God, it's been a tough year. So many folks. All right, y'all. I think we need to do a little bit. I might need to head out, and yeah, I think I'm gonna head out. Let's we'll be back on Thursday at 8. We're going to be announcing guests and stuff like that soon. We'll definitely be doing more Ecuador. We'll be doing more Amazon as well. So looking forward to that. Rest in peace, DMX, for sure. And let me see. I think Matt and I might be doing a think tank soon for patrons. I'll have to get in touch with him after this, and more on the way. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.